A magistrate openly shamed a ceremonial palace sentinel during a standard legal proceeding, only to find himself restrained when his conduct went beyond acceptable limits. The stoic guard's unanticipated reaction astonished everyone present in the legal chamber. Here's the full account of what transpired. Before we proceed, please share your viewing location in the comment section and be sure to hit subscribe, as we'll be releasing another compelling palace guard tale at precisely this hour tomorrow that you wouldn't want to overlook. The early daylight reflected off the gleaming gold fasteners of Lieutenant Nicholas Blackwood's vibrant red uniform as he climbed the rock-hewn steps of Westminster Crown Court. Pedestrians reduced their typical London hustle, some halting to observe the unexpected appearance of a royal sentinel in ceremonial attire outside his normal station. A young boy pulled at his mother's garment and indicated with his finger, his visible enthusiasm capturing the timeless fascination surrounding this historic military unit. Blackwood had grown accustomed to such notice. 8 years with the Queen's Guard had taught him to live comfortably under public observation, transforming from an individual into a living emblem when donning the uniform. At 32, Blackwood presented an impressive figure, even by Royal Guard criteria. Standing 6 feet 2 inches tall with posture perfected by 8 years of military training, his traditional tall bearskin headpiece added another 12 inches to his already substantial height, making him impossible to overlook among the legal professionals in their conventional black garments. Blackwood hadn't intended to visit the courthouse on this particular day. His appearance as a witness in a home invasion case had been planned for the following week, but an urgent summons from the prosecutor's office had requested his immediate presence. The incident involved a break-in he had witnessed while off duty, simply a matter of being at the right location at the opportune moment. Having submitted his testimony months earlier, he anticipated briefly confirming his account before returning to his scheduled responsibilities at Buckingham Palace. "You're making quite an entrance," observed a court administrator as Blackwood presented his credentials at the security checkpoint. "We rarely see any of Her Majesty's elite in these corridors." "Obligation has summoned me twice today, it appears," Blackwood responded with a slight smile that quickly reverted to his practiced neutral expression. Years of remaining motionless before crowds of visitors had given him mastery over his facial expressions that few civilians could comprehend. The security officer, himself a former military man judging by his demeanor, gave Blackwood a respectful acknowledgement as he passed through the metal detector. "I served with the Royal Marines," the man quietly mentioned. "Always gratifying to see one of our own maintaining high standards." Blackwood acknowledged the remark with a slight nod. His uniform had been prepared with the same meticulous attention he devoted to it daily, crimson tunic brushed to perfection, golden buttons polished to mirror-like brilliance, white belt gleaming. Though some might consider such precision excessive for a brief court appearance, Blackwood knew no alternative way to present himself when representing the regiment. A young assistant carrying a stack of legal documents nearly collided with him as he rounded a corner. She halted abruptly, eyes widening at the unexpected sight of his ceremonial attire. "I apologize profusely," she stammered. "Are you here for the Morrison case? It's about to commence in courtroom 7. "Yes, thank you," Blackwood confirmed. He checked his timepiece, an understated watch that had belonged to his grandfather, a man who had served in the same regiment during World War II. He had 15 minutes to locate the courtroom and take his position, ample time for a man who measured his existence in precise seconds. Courtroom 7 displayed the severe magnificence of British judicial tradition. Dark oak paneling absorbed the sounds of hushed discussions while portraits of stern-faced former judges looked down from above. As Lieutenant Blackwood entered, conversations momentarily ceased, heads turning to assess the unexpected splash of ceremonial red among the somber legal attire. He found an unoccupied seat in the rear row of the public gallery, positioning himself with military exactness, back erect, feet at the proper angle, hands resting lightly on his knees. Despite the civilian setting, his bearing remained entirely that of a Queen's Guard. Several nearby individuals shifted slightly, unconsciously creating additional space for him, as if his uniform demanded particular deference. "All rise for the Honourable Judge Victor Harrington," announced the clerk as a side entrance opened. Judge Harrington emerged with the confident stride of someone accustomed to commanding a room. At 58, he carried himself with the practiced authority of his 25 years on the bench. His reputation preceded him, brilliant but temperamental, with a particularly caustic attitude toward those he perceived as wasting the court's time. His thin lips rarely formed a smile, and his eyes behind expensive wire-rimmed spectacles held the perpetual calculation of a man assessing weaknesses. The son of a factory supervisor who had struggled through law school, Harrington had developed a complex relationship with authority and hierarchy. His ascension to the bench had been characterized by both academic brilliance and relentless ambition that occasionally manifested as cruelty toward those he deemed intellectually inferior. Colleagues tolerated his abrasive personality due to his undeniable legal intellect, but few sought his company outside the courthouse. His marriage had ended 10 years earlier, his spouse citing emotional detachment in divorce proceedings that Harrington had approached with the same clinical distance he brought to his cases. Now the courtroom was both his domain and his sanctuary, the one place where his word was literally law. As the gallery returned to their seats, Harrington's gaze swept the courtroom with practiced efficiency. His eyes paused imperceptibly when they reached Blackwood, a momentary falter in his rhythm before he took his position at the bench. The Morrison case began routinely enough, a straightforward burglary with the prosecutor outlining the charges in measured tones. 3 witnesses would testify to the defendant's presence near the scene. Lieutenant Blackwood would be the 4th, his testimony expected to be brief and conclusive. Yet as the proceedings continued, Blackwood noticed Harrington's attention repeatedly drifting toward him. Between examining documents and addressing counsel, the judge's eyes returned to the back row with increasing frequency. His questions to the first witness seemed distracted, his usual incisive interrogation lacking its characteristic precision. "Your Honor," the defense barrister ventured during one particularly extended silence, "shall I continue with my line of questioning?" Harrington's focus snapped back to the case at hand, but not before casting another glance at the scarlet-uniformed figure whose very presence seemed to unsettle his courtroom's carefully maintained hierarchy. Midway through the second witness's testimony, Judge Harrington abruptly struck his gavel, silencing the prosecutor mid-question. "Before we proceed," Harrington announced, his voice carrying the practiced projection of decades on the bench, "I feel compelled to address a matter of courtroom decorum." His gaze fixed directly on Lieutenant Blackwood. "You there in the costume, would you care to explain your choice of attire in my courtroom?" A stunned silence descended. The prosecutor turned, clearly confused by this unexpected interruption of his case. Blackwood rose to his feet with military precision. "Lieutenant Nicholas Blackwood, Your Honor. Queen's Guard, 3rd Battalion. I am on active duty and scheduled to report to my post following these proceedings." "I see," Harrington replied, his tone suggesting he perceived something entirely different. "And you felt it appropriate to appear in full ceremonial dress rather than civilian attire? This is a court of law, Lieutenant, not a tourist attraction." "With respect, Your Honor, regulations require service members to appear in uniform when representing the regiment in an official capacity. Are you suggesting that a minor burglary case constitutes official regimental business?" "No, Your Honor. However, as I am scheduled for ceremonial duty immediately following." Yes, Harrington interrupted with a dismissive gesture. "Standing perfectly still while Japanese tourists take photographs, hardly the pressing military matter you make it sound." A murmur ran through the courtroom. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably. "Your Honor, if we might return to the witness testimony." "In a moment," Harrington countered, his attention still fixed on Blackwood. "I find this display distracting to the serious business of justice. The theatrical bearskin hat in particular seems designed to draw attention rather than show respect for these proceedings." Blackwood remained at perfect attention, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. "Your Honor, the bearskin cap is part of the ceremonial uniform established by royal decree in 1815. I would be out of uniform without it." "Ceremonial," Harrington repeated, infusing the word with disdain. "An apt description for a role that exists primarily for pageantry rather than substance, wouldn't you agree?" The prosecutor stood. "Your Honor, I must object to this line of..." "Objection noted and overruled," Harrington snapped. "This is my courtroom, and matters of decorum fall squarely within my authority." He returned his attention to Blackwood, who had remained perfectly composed throughout the exchange. "Tell me, Lieutenant, Does your training include anything beyond marching in straight lines and standing motionless, or is that the full extent of your capabilities? The insult hung in the air, shocking in its nakedness. Two elderly men in the gallery exchanged glances, their lapel pins identifying them as veterans of earlier conflicts. My training includes extensive tactical and strategic education, sir, Blackwood responded evenly, as well as legal familiarization with the Military Justice Act and civilian military jurisdictional boundaries. Something in the precise delivery of this response seemed to further aggravate Harrington. Very impressive, he remarked, sarcasm dripping from each syllable. Perhaps you'd care to remove the ridiculous hat while in my courtroom, or does military discipline not extend to basic courtroom respect? The King's regulations stipulate that headgear is removed indoors except when under arms or on ceremonial duty, sir. I am currently both. Judge Harrington's jaw tightened visibly, his composure slipping further with each perfectly measured response from the lieutenant. He leaned forward, fingers steepled on the bench before him. Let me be perfectly clear, Lieutenant. In this courtroom, my authority supersedes your military regulations. I find your presence in that theatrical uniform disruptive and your responses bordering on insolent. The prosecutor rose again. Your Honor, Lieutenant Blackwood is here as a witness for the Crown. His testimony is vital too. Are you attempting to instruct me on how to conduct proceedings in my own courtroom, Mr. Palmer? Harrington snapped, his voice sharp enough to make the prosecutor physically recoil. Sit down. Turning back to Blackwood, Harrington's expression had hardened into something approaching contempt. Tell me, Lieutenant, do you find it difficult to think for yourself after years of blindly following orders, or were you selected for guard duty precisely because of that particular quality? A ripple of shocked whispers spread through the gallery. One of the elderly veterans in the third row half rose from his seat before his companion placed a restraining hand on his arm. Even the defendant looked uncomfortable with the judge's behavior. Your Honor, Blackwood replied, his voice remaining steady, British military service emphasizes both discipline and independent critical thinking. The Queen's Guard is selected from soldiers with exemplary service records, many with combat experience. We follow lawful orders while maintaining our capacity for independent judgment. Harrington laughed, a short dismissive sound entirely devoid of humor. How wonderfully rehearsed. Did they provide that little speech along with the costume? He gestured contemptuously toward Blackwood's medal ribbons. And these colorful decorations, participation awards for standing still. The court recorder's fingers faltered momentarily over her stenotype machine, clearly uncomfortable documenting the judge's increasingly inappropriate remarks. The Distinguished Service Cross was awarded for actions during the evacuation of civilians under fire in Helmand Province, Your Honor, Blackwood stated simply. The ribbon beside it represents the Queen's Gallantry Medal for disarming an explosive device that threatened a school. Though his words were factual and devoid of embellishment, they carried the weight of unspoken experiences. What Blackwood didn't mention was the searing Afghan heat as he'd carried 2 injured children through open terrain, the distinctive crack of sniper fire sending dust spouts around his boots with each step. Nor did he speak of the 37 agonizing minutes he'd spent with the improvised explosive device, his hands steady despite knowing that the slightest tremor would mean death for himself and the 200 schoolchildren in the building. Those memories lived in the nightmares that occasionally still woke him, private burdens that had forged the disciplined man who now stood in this courtroom being mocked for his costume. One of the veterans nodded in grim satisfaction at this revelation. The other whispered something that made several nearby spectators turn in surprise. Harrington's face flushed deeper. Your combat fairy tales don't impress me, Lieutenant. Men who need to dress up in costumes and parade around for tourists clearly miss something vital in their development. Article 68 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice acknowledges that ceremonial duties serve a vital function in maintaining public trust and institutional continuity, Your Honor, Blackwood responded, his precise citation delivered without reference to notes. The European Court of Human Rights has similarly recognized the cultural and institutional value of ceremonial military roles in Hemmings versus the United Kingdom, 2007. Harrington pushed himself to his feet, looming over the courtroom from his elevated position. Are you attempting to lecture me on legal matters, Lieutenant? 25 years on this bench, and I'm being given a law lesson by a toy soldier? No, Your Honor. I'm simply responding to your questions with factual information. Factual information, Harrington repeated, his voice rising. Let me give you some factual information, Lieutenant. I find your presence, your manner, and your carefully constructed responses contemptuous of this court. I am holding you in contempt. Immediately, the prosecutor jumped to his feet. Your Honor, on what grounds? The lieutenant has been entirely respectful in his. Sit down, Mr. Palmer, or you'll join him. Harrington shouted, his judicial composure now completely abandoned. The grounds are that I am the presiding judge in this courtroom, and I determine what constitutes contempt. Blackwood remained standing at perfect attention, his expression unchanged despite the threat. Your Honor, with respect, the Contempt of Court Act of 1981 necessitates that contemptuous behavior be shown through deliberate disregard or impediment of legal proceedings. I have exhibited neither disrespect nor obstruction. Right there. Harrington pointed accusingly at Blackwood. That precisely constitutes your contempt, challenging my jurisdiction in my own legal chamber. The atmosphere in Courtroom 7 had escalated to a crisis point. The planned legal matter had been completely sidetracked, with all focus now centered on the increasingly hostile confrontation between the infuriated magistrate and the collected lieutenant. Perhaps, Blackwood proposed with calculated tranquility, Your Honor might consider reviewing Section 14 of the Judicial Conduct Protocols regarding temperament and fairness during court sessions. Judge Harrington's visage twisted with rage, his knuckles blanching as he clutched the edge of the bench. How dare you, he whispered through gritted teeth. How dare you stand there in your elaborate outfit and reference judicial guidelines to me? I've forgotten more legal knowledge than you'll ever acquire. The senior veterans exchanged significant glances. The court transcriptionist continued documenting, though her expression revealed growing concern. The legal system has consistently maintained the principle that contemptuous conduct must be clearly demonstrated, not merely proclaimed, Your Honor, Blackwood continued. In Regina v. Thompson, Lord Justice Blackwell specifically noted that. Enough! Harrington bellowed, his self-control finally breaking. In a gesture born from pure impulse rather than rational thought, he grabbed his gavel and flung it directly at Lieutenant Blackwood. The courtroom erupted in shocked exclamations as the heavy wooden hammer sailed across the space between them. With a quick, fluid motion that seemed impossibly rapid given his formal posture, Blackwood's arm extended and intercepted the projectile mid-flight, his reflexes refined by years of military conditioning. Complete hush descended over the courtroom. Blackwood remained perfectly motionless, the judge's gavel now secured in his white-gloved hand. For a breathless moment, no one stirred or spoke. The implications of what had just occurred seemed to ripple through the gathered spectators in slow motion. Judge Harrington himself appeared momentarily stunned by his own action, his empty hand still partially raised where it had released the gavel. Then, as the reality of what he had done began to register, his expression shifted from shock to something resembling fear. That, Lieutenant Blackwood declared into the silence, his voice carrying without being elevated, was an attack on an active member of Her Majesty's Armed Forces, a criminal offence under Section 39 of the Criminal Justice Act. He placed the gavel carefully on the nearest table, his movements deliberate and controlled. Additionally, the Act constitutes judicial misconduct under Section 27 of the Courts Act, improper conduct while overseeing court proceedings and violation of Judicial Canon 3 regarding maintaining order and proper behavior. For the first time since entering the courtroom, Lieutenant Blackwood removed his bearskin cap, revealing close-cropped dark hair beneath. The gesture somehow transformed him from ceremonial figure to something more immediately authoritative. With respect, Your Honor, he continued, his gaze level and direct, I believe this situation now requires formal intervention. Lieutenant Nicholas Blackwood, Queen's Guard, 3rd Battalion. The soldier began, his voice carrying a new tone of authority that commanded the entire room's attention. Before joining the military, I practiced as a barrister with the Judge Advocate General's Corps after completing my law degree at Oxford with first-class honours, specialising in constitutional and military jurisprudence. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Judge Harrington's face had drained of color, the realization dawning that he had not been berating a simple ceremonial guard but a highly qualified legal professional. "I maintain my legal credentials and continue legal education during off-duty hours," Blackwood continued, "which is why I recognized immediately that Your Honor's behavior today constitutes multiple violations of both criminal and judicial ethics codes." He turned slightly to address the court security officers who had moved forward at the commotion. "Officers, what you have just witnessed was an unprovoked physical assault by a sitting judge against a witness. This constitutes a Category 2 offense under the Judicial Code of Conduct requiring immediate security intervention." The security personnel exchanged uncertain glances, clearly torn between their duty to maintain order and the unprecedented situation of a judge being accused of misconduct in his own courtroom. "This is absurd," Harrington sputtered, finding his voice at last. "I am the presiding judge here. You cannot possibly." Section 31 of the Courts Act specifically states that when a judge commits a criminal offense in open court, normal jurisdictional protections are suspended. Blackwood interrupted, his legal knowledge flowing with the precision of someone quoting from memory. The Judicial Conduct Investigations Office established clear precedent in the case of Judge Martin Harlow, 2016, when he was removed from the bench after verbally abusing a witness. He gestured toward the court recorder. "Every word of this incident has been recorded in the official transcript, including Your Honor's unprovoked insults regarding military service and the physical assault with the gavel." The elderly veterans had risen to their feet. The taller one stepped forward. "Commander William Hastings, retired Royal Navy. I witnessed the entire incident and can confirm Lieutenant Blackwood's account." His companion joined him. "Colonel James Rutherford, formerly of the Royal Marines. I also witnessed Judge Harrington's assault and am prepared to provide a formal statement." Blackwood nodded his thanks to them before continuing. "The assault witnessed by this courtroom carries a maximum sentence of 6 months imprisonment under current sentencing guidelines. The misconduct while holding judicial office can result in permanent disbarment." Harrington's face had gone from ashen to mottled red. "This is nothing but an orchestrated attempt to undermine my authority. I will not be lectured in my own courtroom by a man playing dress-up soldier." "Your Honor," the court clerk interjected cautiously, "the lieutenant is correct about the protocols when a criminal offense occurs in open court." "Are you taking his side?" Harrington snapped, his composure completely abandoned. The senior court security officer had made his decision. He approached the bench with professional calm. "Your Honor, I am required to report this incident to the Chief Magistrate immediately. Until this matter is resolved, I must ask you to step down from the bench." "This is outrageous." Harrington's fist pounded the wood before him. "I am a Crown Court judge. You cannot remove me on the word of a ceremonial guardsman." "With respect, Your Honor," Blackwood responded, "your position makes this offense more serious, not less. The Judiciary Act holds judges to a higher standard precisely because of the power entrusted to them." The courtroom doors opened as another security officer entered, accompanied by a distinguished older woman in judicial robes. "Judge Elizabeth Chamberlain, Chief Magistrate," she announced crisply. "I was in the building for a conference and received an urgent security alert." Her keen eyes surveyed the scene, noting the tension and Harrington's obvious distress. "What has happened here?" Before anyone could respond, the court recorder spoke up. "I have the complete transcript of the incident. Judge Harrington verbally abused a military witness and then physically threw his gavel at him." Judge Chamberlain's expression hardened. "Victor, is this true?" Harrington's shoulders slumped slightly, the fight visibly draining from him as he faced a peer. "Elizabeth, this has been blown completely out of proportion. The guard was being insolent, disrupting my courtroom with his theatrical uniform and—" "The transcript, please," Chamberlain interrupted, extending her hand toward the recorder. As she quickly scanned the document, her expression grew increasingly grave. Finally, she looked up, first at Harrington, then at Lieutenant Blackwood. "Security, please escort Judge Harrington to my chambers. He is relieved of his duties pending a full investigation." Her tone left no room for argument. "Lieutenant, I'll need your formal statement." Colonel Rutherford, Commander Hastings, yours as well." Judge Harrington seemed to physically diminish as the security officers approached the bench. "Elizabeth, you can't possibly be taking this seriously," he protested weakly. "My record of service will be considered alongside today's actions." Judge Chamberlain cut him off firmly. "The transcript speaks for itself, Victor. Assaulting a witness in open court, disparaging military service, this goes beyond a momentary lapse in judgment." As the security officers escorted Harrington from his own courtroom, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Lieutenant Blackwood watched without expression, his military bearing unchanged despite the extraordinary reversal that had just unfolded. "Lieutenant," Judge Chamberlain addressed him, "on behalf of the judiciary, I apologize for this inappropriate treatment. Your service to the Crown deserves respect, not ridicule." Blackwood inclined his head slightly. "Thank you, Your Honor. I understand that Judge Harrington's behavior today is not representative of the bench." With the courtroom still in stunned silence, Lieutenant Blackwood replaced his bearskin cap with military precision and checked his watch. "With the court's permission, I'm scheduled to take my post at Buckingham Palace in 40 minutes. "Of course," Judge Chamberlain replied. "Your statement can be taken later today. This court stands adjourned until tomorrow morning." Lieutenant Blackwood departed the courthouse with several observers nodding respectfully as he passed. The two veterans offered crisp salutes, which he returned with equal precision before stepping out into the London afternoon, his sense of duty unaltered by the morning's extraordinary events. As the lieutenant took his ceremonial position outside Buckingham Palace an hour later, tourists gathered with their cameras, unaware of the extraordinary morning he'd experienced. The scarlet uniform and bearskin cap that had made him a target of Judge Harrington's contempt now drew the admiring glances of visitors from around the world. The irony wasn't lost on him, though his expression revealed nothing as he stood at perfect attention. Back at Westminster Crown Court, the Morrison case had been reassigned to another judge, the defendant looking visibly relieved that his trial would proceed without further theatrical interruptions. The court recorder had already been interviewed by representatives from the Judicial Conduct Investigations Office, her transcript serving as the primary evidence in what was quickly becoming a high-profile misconduct case. Judge Harrington sat alone in a small anteroom, his judicial robes removed, waiting for his solicitor to arrive. 25 years on the bench, hundreds of cases adjudicated, and now his career hung in the balance because of a moment's loss of control. The gavel that had become a projectile weapon now sat in an evidence bag, photographed and documented as if it were a knife or gun. He stared at his hands, wondering how they had betrayed him so completely. News of the incident spread quickly through legal circles. By evening, several barristers who had appeared before Harrington over the years had come forward with their own accounts of his intimidating behavior and questionable temperament. What had begun as a single confrontation was expanding into a pattern of conduct that would likely end his judicial career. Meanwhile, a senior officer at the Queen's Guard headquarters had received a full report of the incident. Rather than being reprimanded for becoming involved in a courtroom disruption, Lieutenant Blackwood found a brief note of commendation in his file the following morning, "Maintained dignity of the regiment while upholding principles of justice," it read, signed by his commanding colonel. What would you do if confronted by someone who misused their power to demean others? Lieutenant Blackwood's account reminds us that genuine strength resides not in yelling the loudest or occupying the highest position, but in sustaining composure while standing resolute for what's just. Behind the ceremonial attire that Judge Harrington mocked stood an individual of exceptional intelligence, discipline, and moral courage, qualities that ultimately exposed the judge's own deficiencies. Occasionally, the individuals we're quickest to dismiss based on appearances are precisely those who have the most to teach us about integrity and respect. If this narrative prompted you to consider the importance of looking beyond appearances and confronting abuse of authority, click that like button and subscribe to our channel for more compelling stories about Royal Guards and the values they embody. Press the bell icon to ensure you never miss our uploads, and examine the other videos appearing on your screen right now. Have you ever misjudged someone based on their appearance or occupation only to discover hidden depths you never anticipated? Or have you observed someone in power misusing their position? Share your experiences in the comments below. We read all of them and would love to hear your thoughts. We'll meet you again tomorrow at the identical time with another completely new video.